I think the most important I do is I try to remind people as many times as possible that I'm the apolitical one in the room, right? I work for an elected body. I work with multiple elected bodies and volunteers, but I'm not political, right? My sole purpose in life is to make sure that the people that are in the know and the people that are authorized to make the decisions have the information and the data and the background they need and to make those informed decisions. I just say, this is the information I have. I'm trying to inform you. This is my recommendation based on my experience, what I think we should do or what we can do, or these are some grant funding availabilities, or we reached out to a subject matter expert and that's what they said. At the end of the day, they own the decision they make and they are responsible to the residents of Marion. So I really try to be at like a 10,000 foot altitude when I do that kind of stuff. Now, it's not easy. It's much easier to talk about than it is to do sometimes, right? And even you work very hard on something, and one of my biggest personal learning paths is to not take things personally. But I take things very professionally, and I work hard. I want to make sure I have the right thing, and then you give it to somebody, and they're like, that's crap. I don't want to talk about that. It's hard not to take that personally. It's hard not to take it home. But I work really hard to make sure that, okay, believe it or not, there's another 150 things on my list. So we'll move that one down a little bit and we'll move up to the one that's next.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have Geoff Gorman here today. Now, this is going to be an exciting conversation because now Geoff is the CEO and town administrator for Marion. Now, we've never had a municipal leader here on the show before, so I'm really excited to be able to learn a little bit more about your Hart and Hustle, Geoff. But before we kind of get into it today, how's your heart doing today, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm good. It was a busy day, and I'm looking forward to have some distraction this afternoon, actually.
Well, I'm happy that I can be that for you there. So as we kind of get into today's conversation, I think it's really important for us to talk about your origin story and how we started to do the work that we do. So if we were to take it way back, how would you describe a younger version of Geoff? What was he into? What type of things was he prioritizing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I grew up in a pretty small town in Illinois, so we did pretty much anything that would keep us in moderate trouble around the cornfields and the rural avenues of Illinois. I mean, there wasn't really much going on. We were family, we would camp and we would have fun and do those kind of things. Went through school and graduated, and then tried to find any avenue I could to get out and make a better name of myself.
And what was that avenue that you chose to kind of get out of the small town of Illinois? What kind of, things did you divulge and kind of really put your energy into it as a young man?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was interesting. I would say in high school that I may have skated through a little bit. And when it became time to sit down with, I think in my senior year, I finally sat down with my advisor, whatever they called them back then. And she was like, well, you're not getting into any of the schools you want to get into and do what you want, and I'm like, oh. When I had a class of 30 people, so being in the 10% is, pretty good, the top three. But so I'm like, what's the other avenue to get out of, the small rural town and kind of learn some new things? And that was the military. So I joined the military, the Navy, actually 2 weeks out of high school. So I graduated and I was on a bus in 2 weeks going to Des Moines, Iowa, and it was all downhill from there.
All downhill. Well, here's my question for you. One of the things that I think is really interesting is we often have experiences early in life where someone in a place of authority kind of checks us or level sets our thoughts on what we're going to be able to accomplish. What was kind of the internal conversation that you had with yourself or your support system that said, hey, just spoke with my school advisor. They said, I'm not going to get into these colleges. Did you always have that plan ahead for yourself, or what was that moment of adversity?
No,
like?
I mean, to be completely transparent, I had no idea what I was doing. Compared to how prepared my daughter was to go to college, I was completely unprepared, and I don't blame it on anybody except myself. At that time I was a young boy doing sports and having fun and trying to catch the eye of the cute girl down the street. But, I probably could have taken 50% of that energy and put it towards academics. But I do have to think I had two very strong male role models in my life, both my paternal and maternal grandparents. They were both able to retire at 55 years old after working hard their entire life. One of them was a municipal executive like myself, which kind of started the fire early. The other one worked for John Deere his entire life. And so, I really did look at them as my guiding light about I need to stop being a nudge, put my head down and start figuring out what I do, work hard and make something of myself. And so when I knew I wasn't going to college, pardon me, another option was to do the military, and there's a lot of opportunity with the military. And so I went.
And that 2 weeks after graduating from high school, we joined the Navy. You spend the next 30 years of your career in this space. So what were those 30 years like? They go by quick. What kind of lessons did we learn?
I mean, looking back on them, they went by extremely quick. While you're in them, it's kind of like, it's like how do you eat an elephant, right? It's a small bite at a time. And that's how it kind of works, because you're kind of going 4 years at a time, 4 years at a time. So I did my initial 4 years. I'm like, oh, I'm going to try something fun. Then I'm like, well, you know what? But if I stay longer, they're going to send me to someplace cool. They're going to send me to a school. I'm going to get more training. And I just kept doing one of those. I was enlisted for about 9 years. I was a welder and a couple of other interesting things. I did some non-destructive testing, which I really enjoyed. And then I was able to get my commission in the late 90s. And then I spent the remainder 20 some years of my career as a naval officer. And that was a little bit different. I knew that I was going to continue on. I'd already passed the decade point. So at that point, why get out when I can retire after 20? And I happened to retire after 20, a little bit over 27. So,
well, first of all, congratulations on an illustrious career. Thank you so much for all of your dedication and serving, our communities abroad and near, and all the work that you've done is just like absolutely phenomenal, man. My question for everybody as we're kind of sitting here navigating our episode is, we had some family members who were executives in the municipal space as well, which is great. Why was it that we kind of came back to this specific work? Was there a calling? Was there an aha moment? What kind of pushed us down this path to do the work that we're doing here today?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't think I'm special in the fact that for people that are especially retired from the military and that go into the military so quickly after their high school, I never had a resume. I never had a job interview. I cooked in high school, but that was who you knew kind of thing, right? And so when I got out of the military, I started looking back on 30 years of experiences and trying to figure out how am I going to translate all this military jargon into civilian speak? How am I going to take these 20 years of managing people in big projects and translate them into experiences that people understand if they hire me? And so I really thought I was kind of starting over again when I retired. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I used to joke with my wife, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up, right? And so luckily I had a friend of mine an acquaintance of mine who offered me the opportunity to do a startup financial services company. That was extremely educational and impactful to my professional development. I spent a year, you're doing a lot of things, building processes, taking care of people, moving money around. It didn't end up being my ball of wax, but I really look back on it great. Then I moved into life science space for about 6 years, doing field service things, which I also found amazing because I happened to be there during COVID, and I found it very positively impactful to myself and other people that we were saving people's lives and helped creating these vaccines and making sure that these labs and these hospitals stayed up and running during what was an amazing time. And not a single one of my gentlemen that I worked with got sick, which I was very happy for. And so I stayed with there. But, in the background, the whole time I'm doing this, I had moved to a town on Cape Cod called Mashpee. For the first time, I grew roots, right? Because I've been moving around every couple of years for 30 years. And I finally grew roots. My daughter was in school. My wife was a teacher in the school district in the same town. I'm meeting people out in town that I know because I'm social with them, not because I work with them. And so I started to see how I wanted to really try to extend my experience to the town. And how do you do that? So I tried some civic engagement. I was elected to the school committee for 2.5 terms. I was on the finance committee for Mashpee for a short amount of time. And while I'm doing this, I continued to see other job openings and meeting other people that were in municipal executives and municipal management in multiple layers. And I'm like, that really is a job that I can see myself fitting into. And it really scratches that itch that I have to be a civic-minded, kind of responsible volunteer. And so the job in Marion came up while I was still attached to the life science company. I researched it. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to the local executives in Mashpee to kind of get their fit. And lucky enough and honored, I was honored to be selected, and here I am. And I think it's a great fit. I'm really having a good time.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you navigate in being a municipal executive. One of the things that I often think about is our cities are incredibly well funded, right? It's the government. They have unlimited money to be able to improve our spaces. Is that true?
I don't think that. I think that would be a disingenuous statement to say for all towns and cities are well funded. I mean, a good example for Marion, I can only speak for Marion. We all have very similar problems, no matter the size of the town. It's just how many resources do we have available to address those problems? We're a small town of 5,000 people. You go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, which I wish I knew the population, probably in hundreds of thousands. They have the exact same problems that we have, except they have 5 people that are working on that single problem, and I'm the person working on it with 5 different hats, right? And, the scope of the problem may be smaller because of the size of the town, but the resources are still needed to do it. It's interesting too for smaller kind of rural under 12,000 population towns. We have the primary funding for us to do services for our residents coming directly from property taxes. For us, it's 80%, right? We don't have a large commercial enterprise in the town. We don't even have room to put a bunch of commercial. And there's many small towns like this around Massachusetts that have to rely on the pockets of their residents to pay ultimately for services throughout the entire town. So we are lucky. Again, I'm in an amazing town with amazing residents, and we are, a fiscally responsible organization. We have a high, what's called the bond rating, which is really the credit rating for a municipality. We're as high as we can possibly be. But I'd be a liar if I didn't say I needed more. I mean, we have, one of the things that we like to talk about is roads, right? Everyone drives on the road every day. It's the first thing you drive in. It's like, oh, this road is terrible, and the potholes. It's, a reasonable sized road. Let's say it's a mile long, is $1 million, right?
Wow.
And that money that we use some funds from the state that we roll over every single year, and it takes 10 years to get up to $1 million. So you can see how quickly you can be behind the power curve with respect to keeping your infrastructure up and running. I think the big thing, I think there's a kind of a trifecta right now, and probably with most municipalities. And one of them is climate resiliency, housing, and for us, like internally, more detailed wise, is having a pool of people to draw from when folks like me retire. I don't really talk about climate resiliency a lot because it's a hot button topic and gets too political and emotional. But at the end of the day, we're a coastal community, and last December we had storms and flooding that reached to streets that have never been flooded before. And so even if we don't call it climate resilience, even if we don't call it climate change, we as a municipality need to work with our businesses and our residents and figure out, okay, how do we make ourselves resilient? Do we have to raise a road? Do we have a pump station for our water system that needs to be brought up? Do we have to do generators? Is there something that we can do that is not necessarily building infrastructure, but recreating natural barriers to flooding, and one of them is wetlands replication. I think when we spoke, we talked about cranberry bog replication, which is a big thing on Cape and in southeastern Mass. If there's there's grant funding available for us to go out to these farmers, and they're like, I'm not. It's not the bang for the buck it used to be. If this is just sitting here, we can get money and take that and turn that back into a wetland, and that actually becomes what I like to think of as a sponge, right? So it's like a natural sponge to protect us from that storm surge and thing that seems to be more prevalent over the last decade or so.
So Jeff, how does a leader navigate some of those conversations? Because even topics like climate change, right, have become politicized. But when they start having an economic impact because of the impact of the weather, we have to think about them from a fiduciary, from a responsibility perspective. So how do you navigate some of those conversations when you have taboo topics like
Exactly.
that get politicized?
I think the most important I do is I try to remind people as many times as possible that I'm the apolitical one in the room. Right. I work for an elected body. I work with multiple elected bodies and volunteers, but I'm not political. Right. My sole purpose in life is to make sure that the people that are in the know and the people that are authorized to make the decisions have the information and the data and the background they need and to have make those informed decisions. And if if it causes somebody behind a table that's been elected to go off, and spin up because I use the word climate change or I use climate resiliency, that's okay. It doesn't bother me, and I don't take it personally. I just say, this is the information I have. I'm trying to inform you. This is my recommendation based on my experience, what I think we should do or what we can do, or these are some grant funding availabilities, or we reached out to a subject matter expert and that's what they said. At the end of the day, they own the decision they make and they are responsible to the residents of Marion. So I really try to be at like a 10,000 foot altitude when I do that kind of stuff. Now, it's not easy. It's much easier to talk about than it is to do sometimes, right? And, even you work very hard on something. And, one of my biggest personal learning paths is to not take things personally. So, but I take things very professionally, and I work hard. I want to make sure I have the right thing. And then you give it to somebody and they're like, I don't know, that's crap. I don't want to talk about that. It's hard not to take that personally. It's hard not to take it home. But I work really hard to make sure that, okay, believe it or not, there's another 150 things on my list. So we'll move that one down a little bit and we'll move up to the one that's next. And housing, if you want to move to housing, or I can
absolutely, yeah.
pause. Yeah, so housing is a big one too. I think that we're up into the lower 70s, upper 60s for a living wage for people in Massachusetts right now. And of course, it goes up if you have children. And I'll give you a good anecdote. It's not Marion, but it's Nantucket, the island of Nantucket. So they're a seasonal island, and they have a cyclic workforce and population, but they have a set amount of police officers, for example, right? They can't hire 30 police officers in the summertime to support their influx of tourism. It doesn't work that way. So they have to find a happy medium, but they also can't pay police officers more than the going rate, which is, to start is in the upper 50s, 50,000 or so, 60,000, which seems like a reasonable amount of money for someone to start a job. But the average home price in Nantucket is $4 million. So you get somebody on the island that's really good at their job. They were number one in the academy. They really have a good cultural fit for the police department, but they can't afford to live there. So that's a very common problem throughout, especially the tourism areas on Cape Cod and southeastern Massachusetts. I think we're into the 800,000s with our average home price. And we have brand new teachers and entry-level teachers and people that just work at the gas station, or people that we want to hire. They're going to help us in the highway, right? Or an administrative assistant. This is one of the places where I say, if I had more money, I'd use it, because, we have a set amount of money for these entry-level people to start. And we want to make sure that they're able to at least live close to where we don't want someone commuting 2 hours to come and do a job and doesn't get home till 8 o'clock every night, because that doesn't last. That's a stepping stone to another job. And then the other thing would be, it's also attached with climate change. One of the things that I talk a lot about is what I call coastal retreat. And so in Massachusetts and a lot of places, when you get houses and people that live near the ocean, those are affluent areas, high expensive homes. But now, we're more flooding. We have, rebuilt flooding maps that we get from the government, and now flooding insurance is through the roof. And these people at some point are going to start to retreat from the coast. And what that's going to do is it's going to take those affluent areas and the high home prices and move it into the uplands, where now our people are getting homes that are reasonable for starter homes. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to spread that out, and it's going to continue to impact our ability to provide affordable homes for the residents that want to be here, or our folks that have families and now they're empty nesters and they want to downsize. We want them to stay here, right? Marion's an awesome place, but we got to make sure that we do that. Luckily, we have a lot of really good opportunity right now in Marion. We have 2 projects in place. One of them has got an affordable housing component, so we're able to support that. And then another one that really hasn't been designed yet, but we have an area. We actually have an area that we could develop as well. Developable land in this area is few and far between. In the last 20 or 30 years, people have been really hard about, in our tourism areas, is to purchase these areas, these developable properties, to make sure they don't get developed by some big conglomerate that wants to build high-rise condos and rent it out for $5,000 a week. But what that does now is we have these big swaths of land that could be used for housing that are permanently, open space. They're conservation restrictions, so they can't be developed. Yeah.
I think about like the challenges of just sitting in your position and recognizing, cost of living going through the roof, right? We only have so much money to be able to support the foundational roles in our community. So how do you think we're going to be able to navigate our way out of these challenges? Because housing prices are going to continue to pump, right? The jobs that we have, or we're not going to be able to give more money. We can't pay police officers 150 or 200 grand a year. So how are you kind of thinking about this challenge and how we're going to navigate it?
Well, there's actually another little layer too, and that's that, as the housing prices go up, they get assessed higher, so their taxes go up. So technically we get more money, but
Right.
Massachusetts doesn't allow us to increase our taxes more than 2.5% per year. So normally that's, pre-COVID, that was okay, right? We could deal with that because we were in an inflationary model between 0 and 3%, right? So if inflation was 2% and we could raise our budget by 2.5%, we're good, right? We can provide COLA increases for our employees. We can perhaps do some maintenance on one of the buildings. The building I'm sitting in right now is a tremendously awesome historical building from the late 1800s, right? I mean, but it takes a lot of money to keep this, in place and taken care of. And right now we have to continue to defer those kind of things. So how do you have those conversations? Again, I don't mean to keep going back on the cliche thing. It's about communication, right? It's about messaging, and it's about strategic vision. We look at our budget at 5-year chunks. I have a great finance director, and we've determined that looking past 5 years, it's a pretty precipitous slope of garbage data when you get past 5 years, right? So we have a 5-year forecast. We can kind of see where our ups and downs are, and we are very open with that. We have a budget process that's a bit weird too. So our fiscal year starts in July of next year. We're already building the budget in September. We started in September for July, and we have to estimate almost everything, right? We have to estimate how much property taxes we're going to get. We have to estimate how many local receipts we're going to get from fees and business taxes. We have to estimate how much new growth we're going to get, how much the health insurance is going to cost. And so there's a lot. We're looking into a muddy crystal ball all the time, but we try to be very conservative. We try to build in some flexibility. And I think those long-term historical fiscal responsible decisions that have been made well before me allow us to absorb what you're talking about, the unexpected increase in, I'll give you a good example. Our retiree health insurance went up 30% this year.
Oh.
Right. That is an impossible budget line item to expect, right? But luckily we have built in safeguards and been conservative in other areas that will be able to absorb that. Now we can't absorb that year over year, right? But 1 year we can, and there's other ways to do it. I think the other thing that impacts us too is building that trust with the townsfolk, and I think we talked about the kind of what I consider an interesting government in Massachusetts, the way we do business. I get a budget that's for the operations of the town, and it's approved by the town folk at town meeting. So we have a town meeting once a year, and they approve our budget. If something happens outside of the normal scope of business that we need money for, we don't have it. The only way we can get that money is to go back to the town and have a special town meeting, which in itself has a cost, right? To put a town meeting together. So what we need to do is when we have those town meetings, we spend an inordinate amount of time talking to people in advance. We have a pre-town meeting where we sit down and say, okay, no topic is off limits. Let's go. Bring it at me. What concerns you have about this, what we call the warrant, all of these stuff that's in our book that we're gonna approve during town meeting. Bring it at me, right? And so when we get to the town meeting, 80% of those questions have already been answered, and we continue year over year to create that trust. I call it the patience well, right? With my previous job, by creating that trust, the patience well is always half full. And so that, you can go up and down when you make people mad. They're like, oh, well, Gorman doesn't normally do this, so we're going to give him a pass on this. Because believe me, I make mistakes. I just make new mistakes every day, right? I don't make the same mistake twice. And so we build that. And so when we go to the budget and people start looking into things and they're like, well, why is this budget line so high, or why does it continue to grow? They understand that when we say, well, we built that in there as a protection to ensure that we had the flexibility for unknowns. They actually take it at face value. There's not a dozen people standing up and saying, oh, you just want money. There's so much about relationship building. I got another thing. My door is always open. right? For anybody that wants to come in. Now, the caveat is it's got a screen door on it. It doesn't really, but I mean, it's got a philosophical screen door in it. There'll be times I can't have that talk. My calendar does get full. But I just, last week, I was very happy. There were some people that were concerned about some rumors that were going around town about some of our finances. And they reached out to me and said, hey, can you have a chat? I'm like, of course I can have a chat. And when we sat down, the first thing I did is I thanked them, because I said, I'd rather have a conversation with you for an hour than have 30 people running around this town, spreading rumors and playing telephone. And the next thing you know, it's, there's an all-out mutiny on our hands. It was a spectacular conversation. I enjoy that kind of stuff. I love coming to a table and trying to solve problems. And I love talking to people and meeting them and learning how their quirks and how they tick. And we left there and everybody was happy. And I really enjoy that kind of stuff. And so that's what I really push for all of our philosophies and all of our people, that work with me.
I mean, this is a healthy version of conflict. Right. I mean, when you think about conflict, there's a lot of things that people talk about today in which conflict is bad. We shouldn't have tough conversations. But if you have a tough conversation one time, it's much better than it being prolonged out and 30 different people having that conversation as well. Doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned 30% increase in insurance. What is the relationship that you have with some of those strategic vendors who provide health insurance like that? When they boost by 30% a year, that seems like a complete response. You guys can't respond to that.
No, we can't.
I mean, so how does that work?
The unfortunate thing is that's, we consider that a non-discretionary expense, right? There's nothing we can do about it. It has to be paid. It's a built-in obligation. Now, of course, believe me, we had a conversation, and it was a hard conversation with our broker, right? And, we made some changes that we demanded some changes for the following year. We had got that information quite late, and here it is, September, October timeframe, we're learning about the 30%. I know that they had information earlier, right? That at least could have, indicated there was going to be a much higher increase than we estimated. We estimated, 8-9%, which is the normal healthcare increase. I'll tell you about the schools too. The schools went through the same thing for school bus transportation, right? So transportation costs are just ridiculous. They were above 30%. They redid their contract. And, who absorbs that is the town. I mean, the schools don't have their own money. They get money from the town. I think right now we're almost 50% of our budget goes to our school. Mm-hmm. And it's only a K-6 school. Then the other, well, that's not true. I'm sorry. We do also have a regional high school that we also have an assessment for. But yeah, I appreciate your comment about the conflict, because I think it's true. And, we've had discussions that, we've had, Massachusetts got this big thing called open meeting law too. We cannot, the executives in this town, I'm not elected, but the elected executives cannot deliberate with themselves outside of open posted meeting. And so there are times when they sit down and they have an emotional discussion with townsfolk, and we have a public hearing, and that is not unhealthy. That is healthy. That is a healthy thing to happen. Not every conversation has to be people smiling and laughing and joking around. Luckily, we live in a town where primarily those are the conversations we have. But when you have the emotional conversation and it's a transparent, open, my big catchphrase, bilateral, respectful conversation, then there's nothing to worry about. You talk about it, you learn, don't be afraid to call your baby ugly just because it's your project, right? And say, you know what? 9 out of 10 people think that this is a dumb idea. It must be a dumb idea, right? Let's go back to the drawing board and figure it out. Draw on some subject matter experts and figure it out, In our previous conversation, you had mentioned, you said,
I'm really good at knowing what I don't know, right? I thought that was really important. Yeah. So when it comes to facing some of these challenges, right, you're not going to have the answer for everything, but we did talk about the skill set of curiosity in our last conversation. How do you think about curiosity from your position as a leader in the community and being able to, I would say, expand our horizons and think about how we can tackle some of these challenges without cold hard cash? What are you thinking about?
No, that's fair. So, I mean, I really do account this for the military, right? So one of the interesting things, not as much as when you're enlisted, but when you're an officer, your job length is 2-3 years, right? And your boss's job length is 2-3 years. So you could change a job, have a boss, get a new boss, and then change a job in like a 3-year time frame. So one of the things you have to be very, very adept at is stepping on board and spinning up super quickly. And one of the things I've determined is you initially don't even know what you don't know. Right. And so it's very, very important to learn that list of things that you're talking to other people. And again, the 2 years, 1 mouth adage, listening to everybody and, oh, that's right. My God, I didn't even know about that. And you're writing it down. And I had the green wheel book in my back pocket that was full. And so I really learned to figure out what I don't know immediately so I can fill those gaps. And then I can do the stuff I do know that I want to polish up on. And it kind of comes in because I only got 2 years to be successful, right? Mm-hmm. 2 or 3 years. And that easily carried over into this, into this mindset. And all of that, like you mentioned, is about curiosity, right? I've always been the kind of person, if I don't come to a day of work and haven't learned something new, then it's not a good day at work. And you can boil it down to even more into kind of the financial word, learn and earn, right? If you're not learning and earning, it's not a good day. And so I'm curious about everything. We were talking about the conversation I was talking about the conversation with the people the residents last week about finances. Not only do I consider that kind of a brainstorming session or a solution finding project, it's also for me educational. There is going to be a question that somebody asks me that I've never thought of. And the way that I get around that is I don't need to know everything, but I guarantee I'll follow up with you, right? So my thing is, I don't know that. And it's about the whole thing going back to trust. Because when somebody asks me a question, I don't know it, you're darn right I'm going to get back to you and tell you because I found it. Because I am curious to know the answer. I don't want to not know the answer. And because who knows what that knowledge is going to extend to, right? They may ask that question. I'm like, oh my God, can you believe what I just learned on the Commonwealth, the mass.gov website? Oh, and there's a grant here. Holy cow, that's a perfect grant for this project we want to do. It is amazing how many different things connect together just because you stop, listen, think, ask the hard questions, be curious, be mindful, be respectful, have open communication. I always think when I talk like this that every single word out of my mouth is cliche, but it really means something, right? It actually connects together. I should read a thesaurus and try to connect some of my other words together so I don't say the same thing all the time. So.
I feel like one of the big advantages of even having a conversation like this is showing what it's like behind the scenes to be a leader of a municipal. So like what we're talking about here is really interesting. How do you think about your last point that we made a little bit earlier was fostering the next generation of great leaders who are going to be able to come in behind you? Yeah. Wow. When we talk about the economic pressure, we talk about all the other things that are going on in the community, people leaving the shorelines, right, to be able to go to places where there's more affordable housing, to be able to invest in their community. How are we thinking about your role in inspiring the next generation of, the great leaders in our municipalities to be able to show up and do this work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that I learned very quickly on during my tenure and in previous jobs when I was doing some elected work in Mashpee is that the pool is shallow with respect to people that understand what a municipal job is, the benefits of being in a municipality. And that the overall mindset, the local and regional organizations and the national organizations that respond to municipal executives, I don't believe do a really good job at supporting the succession plans and development of people so that they can move up while they're in the municipalities, but also, going into our local community college. Massachusetts, for example, just made community colleges free. Right. If you don't, as long as you don't have, there's an age limit and you can't have a degree, but, so it's a unique opportunity for some of these statewide organizations. I reached out to Cape Cod Community College, our local community college, and says, hey, what do I need to do to just have 45 minutes of time with folks in this class so I can talk about what it's like to work for a town, and we can try to find classes that'll fit to make sure they have the skills to roll right in here and start entry level. Because, we just had someone retire that was in the finance department for 31 years, right? And she's got a very good retirement. And I think she can look back very fondly on all the things she did for the town of Marion.
But the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that comes with that 31 years of negotiating and navigating the financial challenges of the community as well is something that needs to be tapped into before she 100%. Leaves and somebody starts new.
And municipalities are not good at succession planning. And it goes back to a corporate job. Normally, if you look even a matrix organization, you can usually find one or two people that have very similar job titles and or job responsibilities. And so there's several people that you can slide into a succession plan that can move up. A town the size of Marion with the finances we're lean, right? We have one person to do one job. And if I have somebody, like I said, her name was Kathy, she's awesome, and she left, she retired. It was difficult for us to pull somebody out of another part of the organization to do that transitional training, because there's not a pool out there to hire somebody like that so that they can sit for a month with Kathy and learn. And then the other second and third order effects of that are, now you're paying two people for the same job.
Yep.
On a budget that was created a year and a half ago that of course didn't include having another person. So there's it really does create a lot of out of the box thinking and try to figure things out. And so we're trying really, really hard right now to make sure that people understand that we support development, that we support cross training, and that we will find a way to fund it if people need to get certifications, if they need to move away from their current customer service role and move into a different customer service role for a couple weeks, twice a year, in order to kind of get those extra skills. We want them to do it. The issue is, it's a huge paradigm shift, right? It's not what the municipal workers are used to. They're really used to staying in the same job for a really long time and then sliding into a similar role that may be a promotion, but not cross training, not transitioning from place to place, not having somebody that you can point a finger to and say, yep, okay, Gorman just retired. We need somebody to be here for 3 months while we do the hiring, and then shadow them for 3 more months to get them up to speed. Most towns, smaller towns especially, aren't built that way.
It's interesting to me because when we talk about things like climate resiliency and some of these changes and curiosity, it's almost like, and no, I'm not saying anything negative about previous generations of somebody who's been in a job for 30 years, but that element of curiosity with thinking about how we can do things differently, it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to tap into that wealth of knowledge from that younger generation unless we get them in early and we start building that pipeline. So what is that conversation like with Cape Cod Community College when you go and show up and say, hey, listen, I just need 45 minutes to start inspiring the next generation? Is that well received? What are the action steps that come from that?
I think it was well received. I mean, the issue with all these kind of out of the box type of things is we're all busy, right? And, I appreciate that the president of a community college gave me time to talk about this and brought in his CFO. He gave me a name of someone who does the adult education portion of Cape Cod Community College, and she actually stopped by the office and we talked. And I appreciate the fact that everyone's very excited for it, but where do they find their funding for it? Where, who's going to do it? What class is it going to be? Are these kiddos going to be paying for this opportunity? So there's a lot more involved to it as well. And what you were talking about with I know you're talking about the previous generations and lack of innovation. It is true, right? I mean, one of the things I think is kind of a positive with the pool getting shallow is that we're not stealing. It's not like it's not just this constant flow of municipal people back and forth from town to town, just going from place to place, chasing the extra pay, right? There's just not enough people to do that now. And so, maybe in 20 years, there'll be more people if we, really push the education. But what I think is a positive about this is we have people like myself who have the skills and the experience to succeed in these roles, but have never been in this role. I come at this in a completely different lens than people that have been doing this for 25 years. Some of it's based out of ignorance too, right? Where I'm like, I go tell the finance director, I'm like, oh, hey, why can't we just do this? And she's like, you can't, that's illegal. You know what I mean? I'm like, what do you mean it's illegal? I mean, that seems, like a really smart thing to do. And she goes, no, the Masters doesn't let us do that. Oh, okay. And, so and then sometimes you look at things and you say something and people are like, wow, I don't know why we didn't do that before. And it's because people get set in their ways, and you've been sitting at the same desk for, 10 years doing the same job and the same cyclic periodic budget review cycle, annual town meeting. And you kind of lose sight of the fact that you could make someone's job a little bit easier just by spending an extra 15 minutes discussing efficiency or continuing improvement and things like that. That's a very corporate mindset. And, I think that some of it, some of that needs to extend into municipalities, because especially for efficiencies and process improvement, there is a fit for that. The way that the municipality operates with P&Ls and the way that the corporate matrix structures work and things like that doesn't lend well. But I learned that very quickly.
Yeah, it seems like we're in a really interesting point in time right now. We've got technology like automation, artificial intelligence, where you got some people in certain sectors who are being evangelists or on the front end of the adoption curve saying this is the way to solve the problems that we're facing. But we also have organizations like government bodies, healthcare, municipalities that aren't on the front end of that adoption curve. And so how are you kind of thinking about, technology being kind of maybe the one of the golden BBs that we kind of shoot at many of these problems to help kind of be more efficient?
I cannot agree with you more on that. I mean, one of the first things I came into when I came in this job is I was absolutely astounded at our IT infrastructure, right? I mean, when I got here, we didn't have an IT director. We had people who had computers that were so old they couldn't even be updated anymore. We're using paper time cards. It's 2024. Meanwhile, the person who's in charge of payroll is spending an entire week doing payroll for a fairly small town, and all of that can be really lend towards IT infrastructure improvement. And so one of the things I did, when I first got here is we have this kind of neat thing called our capital improvement plan. So we do a 10-year capital improvement plan, and it could be anywhere from buying a new police vehicle to a new sewer pumping station to a sidewalk, whatever it is, right? And all of the department heads submit their 10-year plans. We put it, a committee actually gets to go through and prioritize them. And then during the budget process, we see how many we can afford to pay for. One of the things I added last year was an IT refresh program. Because one of the, part of the problem with this is that, it's great. There's software out there that makes HR easy. There's software out there that makes budgeting easy. There's software out there that allows us to do better payroll, but it all costs money, and it all has resources that need to be put towards it in a lean team like this, which is difficult. So because we'd be pulling somebody off that's got 5 hats away from that and adding another hat to them. And so we have to be very mindful about how big of a project we tackle at one time. And so I did the IT refresh program. So we got money that we'll be getting money every year for 3 years, where we've done first in, first out. Somebody's computer that can never be updated, we've already replaced it. My favorite story is, and I don't know how much of a nerd you are or not, Keenan, but we had a server, and this isn't beating anybody up, it is what it is, right? We had a server at one of our offices in one of our departments that had been running continuously for 5.9 years, never restarted, never patched. And, first of all, congratulations for old school servers that can last that long, because I don't think a new one would do that. But, so that was a perfect example of why we needed this IT refresh, to make sure that thing didn't, first of all, fail. And now we're at emergency to try to find the money to replace it. But this way we can proactively place it and make sure that we don't lose anything and we can transition into it, et cetera. Another thing we did with the same capital program is digitization. I'm a big person about, people walking up here and handing me a piece of paper to take a day off. Right? Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And so I'm like, well, what we need to figure out how we can make that automated, right? And either automated or a more digital format process. And so another thing that we requested through the capital program is a digitization. It's a hard word for me. Digitization process, where not only for our own internal processes, but maybe someone is building a home in Marion and they need a site plan from a house that was built in 1942. They can go online and request that, and it's much easier for someone to shoot it out to them via the computer. Now they have it, and it's a digital copy. And so that's a great leading question. I really appreciate it. It's a huge project for us right now. We call it my 3-legged stool project, right? So we have the digitization, we have the IT infrastructure improvement, and then we really need to work hard to try to find a place in the budget to have our own internal on-site IT network guy or girl, yep. Right? Because right now we have a third party supporting us, and although they're a great company, nothing is the same than somebody that can walk into your office and take care of your mouse that doesn't work or your printer that's not printing, as opposed to putting in a ticket and waiting for someone to call. So we're too small for that. All of our processes and the way we take care of our customers internally should be very boutique, right? It's not like a $50 billion global company.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective, because what you're fighting against is limited resources, limited time, but also the need to adapt to this new digitized world is challenging. And you can't just shoot one silver bullet at it. You have to shoot 100 golden BBs that are going to tackle these things slowly but surely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's my, as we kind of wind this down, what is the future going to look like? As a leader of an amazing municipality, taking care of a city, investing into time, growing roots, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years here? What's your shot that you're calling if you're
I think that, if you're asking me for personal stuff, I would like to retire for real at some point. I think that we are in a really good trajectory in Marion on a both personal and professional status to really, in the next decade, really create a brand new kind of scope for this whole place. So we're talking about increase residential housing availabilities, increase our population, increase our water and sewer users, which drive down our fees for water and sewer. It's the quote from Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come, kind of things. It goes both ways, right? But if we want more commercial here, we need to have more people. How do you get more people here? If we want the school enrollment to go up, we need to have families here. So again, everything's connected, and we're trying to be as strategic as possible to make sure we get it. For me personally, I just retire, and my wife and I have always talked about settling in Hawaii at some point. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, that's the best spot to be, man.
I think so. We love Cape, and I told my wife, I said, I grew up in the middle of the cornfields, and I do have an affinity for the mountains and lakes and things. And she goes, I can't be more than a couple minutes from the beach. I'm like, okay.
Sounds like the next chapter is going to put you in the middle of the Pacific. You know what I mean? Well, Jeff, I just want to say, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. One of the traditions we have here on the podcast is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. So, in times of turbulence, what does courage mean to you as a leader?
I think it is doing what you know is right, even when nobody is watching. A big thing for me is integrity. And you kind of, as soon as you start talking about in times of turbulence and courage, I had the grand pleasure of spending a year in Iraq. I immediately brought up some of the situations that I was in over there. And, I think you could very easily do some incourageous things in those situations where, with, the fog of war, and you talked about the turbulence of what's going on and the chaos. And, I think courage really is both in a peacetime and a wartime. It's doing what you want to do. And that if you're standing in front of somebody doing it, that it's the same that you would be doing it when nobody's watching.
And that's a beautiful place for us to put a wrap on it. Geoff Gorman, once again, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You are the definition of heart and hustle, and it's been a pleasure to be able to share your story here today, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the invite, Keenan. Have a great one.